In this lesson, we're going to explore policies and pools and how you use them with a service profile. We're going to create a service profile in both basic and expert mode, and then we're going to talk a little bit about templates and why we use them in UCS Manager. Let's take a look at UCS Manager. Here we are in UCS Manager, and I picked the Servers tab, and underneath the Servers tab I found my service profiles. Now, service profiles are a profile that basically defines what my server is. It's all of the configuration pieces about my server that I take and put in a file, and then I associate that file with physical hardware. You can only have one service profile associated with one server, but I can easily copy service profiles or create service profiles from a known good template. In this case, I'm going to create a service profile, and I'm going to kind of push the easy button to show you how easy it can be. I'm going to click Create a Service Profile. I'm going to give it a name, like Exchange. Now I'm going to follow the wizard. First, I need to configure my connections. I need to pick whether or not I want a primary and or secondary network interface on my server. In this case, I'm going to have both. I'm going to call it Ethernet 0, and Ethernet 0 is going to be associated with Fabric A, and I'm going to have Ethernet 1, and that's actually going to be associated with Fabric B. For some reason it's not showing up here, but that's Fabric B. Secondly, I'm going to pick the VLAN that should be associated with this server. In this case, I'm picking my server prod VLAN. Secondly, this server is actually going to boot from SAN. So I want it to have a primary and a secondary HBA. I want it to have two paths to get to my storage. The first one I'm going to name FC0, but I could easily change that. And here I'm going to pick Fabric A once again. I'm going to pick my vSAN for Fabric A, which is 2000. The secondary HBA, or my second redundant path, my SAN B, is going to be Fiber Channel 1, and it's going to be associated with Fabric B, which is, and you can't see it, and I'm going to pick vSAN 2011, which is my Fabric B vSAN. Now finally, I'm going to pick my boot order. And I can do a couple different things. I can pick local disk, I can pick internal USB. I've got a ton of different options here. But in order to take advantage of service profiles to the fullest, I'm actually going to SAN boot my server. So I pick SAN, and I tell it which HBA to use, which on this side we're going to use Fiber Channel 0. I tell it which LUN, which a lot of times is 0 automatically, and then I give it a target name. This would be the target of the storage device that I want to boot from SAN on. Now I may also want to configure a secondary boot device, and in this case I would pick my second fiber channel adapter for redundancy. Once again, say LUN 0 because it's most likely that, and then add in the target worldwide name. Now I could be done right there. I can create the service profile and not associate it with an actual hardware server. But in this case, I have a couple servers available to associate, and I'm going to go ahead and pick one, and then I would press OK, and that's it. I've configured everything I need to configure for this server to come up and be running. Now I don't get the OK because I didn't put in a worldwide name, but if I change this to local disk and take off my secondary boot device, then I can go ahead and push OK. Now I've successfully created my service profile for Exchange. And that's as easy as it can possibly get. But let's dig into that a little bit further. I'm going to go ahead and delete this service profile and start over. Okay, let's go in expert mode. So if I go to create my service profile in expert mode, I still get a handy dandy wizard, but I get a lot more options. First of all, when I create a server, it's good to have a UUID, or a Universal Unique Identifier. In this case, I don't have one specified, and I want to create a new one. So I'm actually going to create a pool of addresses that any of my service profiles can pick from to get their UUID by saying create UUID suffix pool. And this will be server UUID pool. And I can pick this to be derived. Click next. I can add a block of them, and I can say how big I want the block to be. So if I want to create a pool of 50 addresses, I'll go ahead and do that. I'll say OK and finish. So now, just like DHCP, I've actually created this pool of UUIDs that any of our servers can pull from with their service profile by simply selecting the new pool that I created. Here it is, my server UUID pool. I've now selected it. Next, we go on to our networking. Now there's a couple different things that we can do here. For instance, we can create a dynamic NIC connection policy. And what this does is it actually allows us to create anywhere from 2 to 256 different NICs for my server. But I don't want to do that today. Today I want to go ahead and just configure regular LAN connectivity. So it's giving me the choice to create two different adapters, one on Fabric A and one on Fabric B. Now, if I needed to create VLANs to associate to those adapters, then I could go ahead and do that. I do have a couple already available, so I'm going to use my server prod VLAN for both of these. Now in this case, I could also already have a policy that defines how my Exchange servers should be configured, or how their NICs should be configured, and that would be called a connectivity policy. And in this case, I do not have one defined, but I can go ahead and create one. And this will be Exchange connectivity policy, and I can go ahead and say this connectivity policy has two adapters. And I can say that this policy has an Ethernet 0 adapter. Now that adapter can as well use a template. So if I say create a template, I can say that this is a VNIC template for Exchange, and that it's for an adapter, and this adapter belongs to Fabric A, and that I should enable failover. I can say that this adapter takes part in my server prod VM, and that this adapter should have an MTU of 1500, and that I can also specify things like quality of service level. Now that I have created that template, I can go ahead and use that template by simply saying use VNIC template and then choosing that template that I just created. These templates are great because I can actually configure either an initial template or an updating template. Now the initial template is just what it says it is. You get exactly what you configured in that template. The updating template, if I make changes to that template, those changes automatically get funneled down to the servers that are using that template. In regards to my adapter policy, there are some preset adapter policies by Cisco that work great here. This time I'm going to choose Windows because my Exchange is running on Windows. So I now have defined my connectivity policy that includes Ethernet 0 and is soon to include Ethernet 1. Because I already created that template, I can just grab that template again and I can choose Windows here and say OK. So I now have two adapters in my Exchange connection policy, and I can go ahead and say OK. Every time I create an Exchange server, I can use that same standard policy to define how I want my network adapters to be defined on that server. Now I can go on to my storage. In the storage section, I have similar options. For instance, I can have a local storage policy that says that this server must have mirrored drives in it. I can also have my own local disk configuration policy that maybe says these drives have to be RAID 5 or there should be no drives in it. In this case, I'm just going to leave it the way it was. And I'm going to go down here because I actually would like to boot from SAN. Now once again, I can very easily use a connectivity policy here that has everything already configured for how I want to use the SAN. I can also go through and do it kind of ad hoc. I can create a pool of WWNs for my adapters, and in this case I already have one created, as well as I can specify what my adapter names are and which vSANs I'll be using. I can even specify zoning information if my fabric interconnects are performing this function. I can specify the PCI order that the placement of the NICs and HBAs will be in the server. I can also specify a virtual media policy to access information across the network when I boot my server. Next, I would configure my server boot order. In this case, I would configure a policy, for instance, boot from SAN or boot from CD-ROM. This defines the boot order of the server depending upon what you choose here. Next would be the maintenance policy. You could leave it as no policy by default, but you could also create a maintenance policy. What this does is it allows you to specify if you make a change to the service profile, whether it should happen immediately, ask for your acknowledgement, or happen based on a timer. It's usually a best practice to use the user acknowledgement. That way you don't make a change to a policy or a profile that makes a server reboot right away and cause an unplanned outage. Next, we can assign the service profile to a existing server, or we can actually create a pool of servers for this service profile to draw from, and if there's resources in that pool, it will associate with those resources and come up. In this case, I'm going to assign it later. The last tab has several options that you can pick as far as policies that apply to BIOS policies, IPMI, management IP addresses, power control policies such as power capping, scrub policies, what you want the server to do with the data if the service profile is removed, and a KVM management policy. As I mentioned, everything can be configured with policies and templates and reused over and over again. Not only does this let you create a kind of a gold standard for your servers, but it also reduces the amount of human error by creating a known good profile. If I want to make another Exchange profile, I simply highlight the Exchange and I say create a clone. I can then say Exchange 2, put it under the same organization, press OK, and I've now created a second service profile almost exactly like the first, with different MAC addresses and UUIDs that it's going to pull from all those pools. So you can see how powerful that is. I literally built a server in a couple of seconds. The last thing that I want to explore is the service profile templates. The templates are really great because I can define that gold standard for an ESX server, and I can put it in a template, and then I can actually create service profiles based on this template. So if I highlight this template and I want to create more service profiles from this template, say I want to create 5 Exchange servers, I literally just say create service profiles from template. I give them a name prefix, and then I say that this is going to be 5 through 10. And I press OK. Now I have just created ESX server profiles for 10 servers, starting at number 5. You can see how powerful that is. I just created 5 servers in a number of seconds. Now the great thing about the templates is that they can either be initial templates or they can be updating templates. So if I want to change something for all of those service profiles that are associated with this template, I simply change the template and it gets funneled down to those service profiles. I can also unbind the service profiles from that template and say I don't want it to be updating anymore, or I want to make an individual change to this server. So I can go ahead and unbind that. Please spend some time taking a look at the different policies and pools that you can create and how you can use those policies and pools with service profiles. This information is very powerful in your day-to-day administrative tasks, as well as very helpful for the test.